You've found Wickett on Wisconsin, your one-stop podcast for all things Packers, Brewers, Bucks, and the rest of your favorite teams from all over the state of Wisconsin. We're powered by Wisconsin Sports Heroics, online at wisportsheroics.com and the Wisconsin Podcast Association. And now, here's your host, Mike Wickett.
Well, let's see, the Bucks are in the playoffs. The Brewers are getting warmer. Why not do this week's podcast about the NFL draft and the Green Bay Packers? Because it's always Packers season. It is always show me that draft smoke and all those lies season. It's my favorite time of year. Joining me, my coworker from wisportsheroics.com and a guy who does his own podcast called Beer, Deer, and Cheese. And if you are a Wisconsin fan, you are going to want to pay attention to that, a Wisconsin sports fan. Sam Davel is with us. Sam, thanks for the time, man. How are you? I'm glad to see you're drinking a beer because that's what I do as well during these podcasts.
Yeah, well, once about 8:30 hits, you've got to crack something open after the day. No, but thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it. I do beer, deer, and cheese. We run more during the season. We'll do, previews, recaps, stuff like that. So the off season, we've kind of been giving it a break and focusing more on writing for with Sports Heroics. So it's been good. But like I said, I appreciate it. I'm excited to talk some Packers and we'll get into it.
For those that don't know, over at the website, we have a Twitter feed. And on said Twitter feed, all the writers kind of like I was bored. I'm like, what are the guys talking about today? And a lot of the guys were going back and forth about all the different wide receivers that are allegedly available. And every Packers fan has their favorite one they want him to go after. And we've kind of narrowed it down to the big four that are currently on other teams, right? It's Terry McLaurin with Washington, DK Metcalf in Seattle, A.J. Brown in Tennessee, and Deebo Samuel in San Francisco, which, by the way, we've got news about Deebo to talk about. Before we get to that, you and I are on different ends about who is the number one target. I've been a DK guy for a while. You're not a DK guy. Who is your number one target for Green Bay of those four if they actually do pull the trigger and go for it and do the not-so-Packer thing?
Yeah, so I am, not necessarily a DK guy, but I do want to start off by saying any of these four would be a significant upgrade over what they have.
Cheers.
And would, get the job done and move, tick their meter forward. But I guess of these big four, for me, my personal favorite is A.J. Brown from the Tennessee Titans.
Why?
So I kind of look at it like this. So the Packers lost Davante Adams, right? And you hear in baseball all the time, it's a 5-tool prospect. Well, if you look at Davante Adams, he's technically kind of a 5-tool receiver. He can get it done in the slot. He can get it done over the top. He can win immediately on the line of scrimmage. He can go over the middle. He can work intermediate. And so if I'm the Packers, I'm looking for the closest person that has those 5 tools. And when I take a look at DK Metcalf, he's fantastic over the top, real fast. I don't think he has the lateral quickness to win at the line of scrimmage, and I don't love him in a lot of the short stuff. And I think the closest receiver from those four is A.J. Brown. You take a look at Deebo Samuel. I love Deebo Samuel, but for him to be successful, it kind of seems like he's got to be in the same kind of role that he is with the 49ers. And then you take a look at Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin would probably be my number 2, kind of the same thing. He has those 5 aspects that I would look for in a receiver.
Man, our list couldn't be more different, and that's why it's great, because I think people who are listening to the podcast who are Packers fans, everybody has their guy. Like, I'm a DK guy because, and you and I were kind of talking about this, I think the Packers have their short to intermediate route guys up and down this subpar wide receiver roster between Sammy Watkins and whatever you expect out of him. My bar is so low for Sammy Watkins. If they get 8 games out of him, and it's no disrespect. It's just I used to work in Kansas City, and I covered the Chiefs for a time. And I know the headaches that he gave the Kansas City Chiefs. And it's not this. We're not talking about a guy who's a beacon of durability. Alan Lazard is just a guy, probably a 3, maybe a 2 at best. He's not a number 1. Randall Cobb is there. They, with LaFleur's offense, Aaron Jones catches the ball. They utilize 4 or 5 different tight ends seemingly throughout the entire year. They don't have that big play guy. And I agree with you. Davante is the 5-tool wide receiver. I would never even think of Davante as an elite downfield threat, But with Aaron Rodgers, everybody can be a downfield threat.
Exactly.
That's where, to me, DK Metcalf comes in as the guy that can take the top off, the guy on a 3rd and goal from the 12. If you need to get a jump ball caught in the end zone, he's so big. He's 6'4", he's 215 or whatever. He's the size of a tight end. He, to me, is the guy that can get you 11 touchdowns. He may not have 1,000 yards, but he's the guy down the field that can get you a big play.
Right, but then let me ask you, do you worry at all with DK being kind of like the one guy from this group that has played with an elite quarterback and played with an elite receiver opposite of him?
No.
Okay.
and the reason why, you watch Seattle play for the last 5 years, there's a reason Russ wanted out of Seattle. There's ever since that Super Bowl year, with when Butler picked the pass off and everybody thought Marshawn should have run that football in. Seattle hasn't been great. Their offensive line has been horrible. Their offense has been run, and then, oh, God, we need to let Russ cook in the 4th quarter. And that's when the let Russ cook. That's when his heroics. I mean, Denver now all of a sudden picked up a top 10 quarterback and didn't have a top 25 quarterback. He's going to make that offense so much better. He is an elite quarterback, there's no doubt, but that offense, it almost felt like they were handcuffing Russell Wilson for years because their head coach is 70, their head coach is old school, there's nothing creative out of that offense. And because Russ it all came on Russ in the second half of football games when they might be winning 13-10, they might be losing, 14-9, something ugly. Seattle doesn't play a lot of exciting, knock your socks off kind of football. So to me, that offense stunted Russ, and that offense stunted DK and Tyler Lockett. And you still look at the numbers that Metcalf has put up with all of that and a stud wide receiver on the other side. I've been a victim of the Tyler Lockett game in fantasy football about 27 times when I look up and I'm like, oh, Tyler Lockett's got 3 touchdowns tonight. Of course he does. That's less to go DK Metcalf's way, and he's still got 29 touchdowns in 3 years.
Yeah, no, he's been an absolute stud for Seattle, absolute stud. The only thing that worries me is going back to, like I said, kind of that 5-tool prospect. Like, I think with the Packers in the situation that they're in, it's easier to tell a rookie in his first year, hey, you're going to be the deep guy. Like that role is pretty specific. So if I'm the Packers,
that's
and
Henry Ruggs in Vegas before he killed someone. That was Henry Ruggs' role.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, that to me is easier to find in the draft. And most likely the Packers are still going to take a rookie receiver, whether that's round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4, even with picking up somebody, trading for one of these big 4. I think you could find that speed over the top guy similar to MVS, who was a fourth round pick, might've been a 5th. No, I'm pretty sure it's 4th. No, I think he was 5th because Jamon Moore.
3. How's that?
Yeah,
he
was day 3. So I think you can find that over the top deep threat receiver later in the draft and simplify a rookie's role, saying, "Hey, you're our over the top guy." When it's much harder to simplify a rookie's role and saying, "Hey, you're our go-to guy. If we need 7 yards, we need you to run 8 yards, get separation, turn around, catch a ball." Like that's more difficult.
I know your guy is A.J. Brown. I don't like his injury history. I watched him last year a lot. He's a guy that seemingly has an ailment, and he's only 24. I mean, he's the youngest guy of these 4 that we're talking about. So obviously, maybe last year was just a thing. But I know Tannehill's not Rodgers, and what would Rodgers do with A.J. Brown? What would Rodgers do with any of these guys?
Yeah.
Would be special. A.J. Brown's injury bug, that's what scares me the most.
I mean, I think like the thing with me and injuries is you can't plan for injuries. Injuries are going to happen. You can have a guy that has never missed a game and week 1 tears ACL and he's done for the year. So, injuries are obviously a concern, but unless you're 12 years in the league and you consistently have hamstring pulls coming up on the injury report, it's not a giant deal for me and it's not a deal breaker for me. And if you watched A.J. Brown last year,
he's a beast. He's a beast.
When healthy and when on, absolute game changer.
I don't disagree with that. I don't. But we're talking about those the hamstring injuries. But enough about Sammy Watkins. Let's move on. Who's the safest of the 4? Do you think the safest wide receiver of these 4? McLaurin, Metcalf, A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel.
So I'm actually going away from AJ Brown, and I'm gonna sound like a hypocrite.
No, it's
Going
okay
away
because my
from him.
answer is not DK Metcalf.
I think Scary Terry is the safest. I think, he's been healthy. I think he does exactly what you want him to do as a receiver. I actually think he'd probably be the cheapest of these three if we're talking about in a trade situation. I think Deebo would be really expensive coming from the 49ers. I think the Packers would have to overpay drastically for the 49ers to agree to a trade with the Packers. I think DK would be expensive because they're kind of looking to rebuild. But I think Scary Terry is the safest option. Like, I think if you put him in an offense with Rodgers, he's the safest bet to be an immediate top 8, top 10 receiver in the league.
I think my answer is exactly the same. I think if you put McLaurin and you put him in this offense, he's an 85 catch guy. Maybe he's a 100 catch guy, depending on how wacky LaFleur gets. I agree with you. I think his in fantasy football, nerds like me say floor and ceiling. I think the floor is the highest for McLaurin. I think the ceiling might be the lowest of the four, but he's the guy that I feel like I could plug into that offense for 4 or 5 years. I know what I'm going to get. It doesn't sound like he's a headache. It doesn't sound – people are worried about DK Metcalf, and now with this Deebo Samuel news we're going to get to, I never hear anything about Terry McLaurin. If I said – and I don't know if Washington's interested in Love, but to me, with Seattle, whether it's Lockett or Metcalf that comes back, I'm a Jordan Love guy.
Mm-hmm.
Would he be enough and a 1, like a 1 and Love, would that be enough to get maybe that 28th pick in Love and throw it as 6th or whatever? You think that's enough to get DK Metcalf? Because I don't think Tennessee's interested in a quarterback, and obviously San Francisco's not. I have no idea what the Commanders are doing.
Yeah, I mean, I never hear anything bad about Scary Terry, and he's playing for a trash organization that he could easily go off on any day of the week. But I like Jordan Love. I'm higher on Jordan Love than a lot of people. It was reported early that he had no trade market, and then it was reported that he was going, teams were talking about a 2nd-round pick. So I don't know exactly what the market is, but I do think a first and something. I think a first and a third, a first and a fourth would probably get it done for Scary Terry. So if the Commanders view Jordan Love worth a 3rd-round pick, which I think there's a market there. I think you can make that argument pretty easily. Then I think it's enough to get it done. I will say, if one of these 4 receivers are available, whatever the cost is, I think the Packers should do it because their win now, the production has been there. These guys have succeeded in the league, and you're not taking a chance on them. I think AJ Brown is the least reception guy, and he's got a 70 catch season on his hand. Like, what you're going to get with these guys, and the production's going to be there, and you're Super Bowl or bust. So you got to do it.
Deebo Samuel wants out. That is the hot rumor that just came across Twitter before you and I started recording this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I believe it. Like I said in the onset, it's show me the smoke season. These guys are sitting out these voluntary workouts. Perhaps I would want to think back to our list. And I thought about this right before you and I got together here. And I thought, did I hold Deebo off the top of my list because I think he's the most unattainable? Like, why would San Francisco help out Aaron Rodgers? They'll figure it out. You can argue outside of Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel's the most valuable non-quarterback in the league last year. I know Derrick Henry got hurt. But what he does for that offense and how that offense translates to Matt LaFleur's offense, which is very, very similar. I don't know if I took Deebo's name seriously in all of this, but all of a sudden an hour ago, we find out he wants out if he doesn't get the mega deal in San Francisco.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing that I still think Deebo is the least attainable. He might be the most tradable of these 4, but I think if you're Green Bay, he's still one of the least attainable because the 49ers aren't going to trade Deebo Samuel to the Green Bay Packers unless the deal is significantly better. So if teams are offering a first and a second for Deebo, the Packers are going to have to come up with an additional, third or an additional second. They're going to have to sweeten that pot to the point where the 49ers are like, we can't pass this up. We just absolutely can't.
Would you give up both ones? Would you give up 22 and 28 for Deebo?
I would not, no. And the reason why I wouldn't is because I think Deebo is incredible. he's a fantastic player. But I worry about Deebo's production in Green Bay with the weapons that they have. Like the 49ers used Deebo a lot in the backfield and doing things like that. Well, does that take snaps away from Aaron Jones? Does that take snaps away from AJ Dillon? Because Aaron Jones kind of can do a lot of the same things that Deebo can do from the backfield. He's smaller. He doesn't run at the same power. But what does Deebo look like in LaFleur's offense compared to what he looked like last season? And if we go back and look at Deebo's numbers before last season, he had 57 catches his rookie year, 37 receptions his second year, and then he explodes in this new wide back role. Is that wide back role can they replicate that in Green Bay with the pieces that they have?
And this was actually a healthy year for George Kittle, but that backfield in San Francisco was a disaster every single week. Like it always is, seemingly. They have 5-6 guys who, they're trying to figure out who the right piece is. They didn't have a real good second wide receiver option in there, so does that factor into the productivity for Deebo Samuel? But, man, if there's a way, like you said, if it's a 1, a 2, and a 3, I probably pull the trigger on that. 2 1s, maybe not. The only reason I don't like it, like you said, the one-year wonder thing, Deebo's 27, not old by any stretch, but I look at the other 3. Like, if I have to pick which one I want, Terry McLaurin's, 25? And the other 2 guys are 24. Whoever you get, you have to give a long-term deal to. So who do I want that's going to be going into their prime or in their prime the longest if I'm given a 4-year, $112 million contract to? I just threw that number out there.
Yeah. No, I agree. And actually, I'm looking at it right now, and actually, Scary Terry's 26 and a half.
I wrote 26 out of question mark.
And Deebo is 26, and PFF has him as 26.2. So whatever 0.2 is in a year, it's like 90 days, I think.
Yeah, he was born 2 months ago in 26 years, whatever.
Yeah. No, I agree. And they're going to have to backload it, and you're going to have to be okay probably not getting off of that deal for 4 seasons. And so if you do go with a guy like Scary Terry or Deebo, are you okay with paying them kind of that top market rate when they're 30? And Deebo, he takes a lot of hits. A lot of the stuff that he does is in the middle of the field, from the backfield. He doesn't kind of have those outside receiver options where he catches a ball on the sideline, puts 3 feet in, and then steps out of bounds. And so do you worry about the potential of an injury with a guy like Deebo Samuel in his current role?
Yeah, I think you kind of have to. And if that's what because they're not all of a sudden going to just split him out wide for 17 games in Green Bay if they bring that guy in. Whereas you're not changing DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, or Terry McLaurin's role, significantly. So that does definitely play into it. Gut feeling, does any of this happen, or are we just, as nerds, as podcasters, as radio guys, as media guys, are we just we need something to fill us before we get to the draft?
Yeah, honestly, gut feeling, DK doesn't move. Gut feeling, Deebo doesn't move. Gut feeling, AJ Brown doesn't move, but I'm not as solid about that. They've got some cap issues, and I'm sure that they would like to save a little bit of money. He doesn't save them.
He pulled himself off of
he pulled
Instagram
Tennessee
and Twitter.
Pulled Tennessee out of his bio. That means he's done. He doesn't save them a ton of money, but maybe they want to cheapen it up a little bit. I think there might be a legitimate chance that Terry could move. I think the Commanders, they've got to get some kind of excitement. And if their excitement is bringing in a bunch of young players that have hype, it might work. Depending on if you were the Packers, if the Commanders called you up and said, "Hey, Goot, we'll give you Scary Terry for 28 and 53."
Done.
Exactly. And so who are they taking at 28 and 53? Possibly Christian Watson, who has all of the hype in the world right now. You know what I mean? And then another receiver, and everybody knows Carson Wentz has a cannon. When healthy, he can hit a deep ball. So do you try to get an explosive offense and try to put fans in the stands that way? I don't know.
I would love it if Watson went to Green Bay, and I'd be okay at 22 with Christian Watson because he's such a great run blocker. He fits in the LaFleur scheme so well. Last year, the top 2 run-blocking wide receivers, according to Pro Football Focus, were Sammy Watkins and Allen Lazard.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason they paid very minimal, but they actually paid Sammy Watkins to come to Green Bay because of that role. That's what Watson does so well. I know 22. If he's your guy, you go get your guy. Sam, that's what you do.
That's what Goot has shown. I think I tweeted out the other day, like, I don't think the Packers will grade highly from the national media because we've kind of seen them reach. You know, they reached for A.J. Dillon. They reached for Jordan Love. They've reached for their guys, and it's worked out for them.
I don't know the last time the national media gave the Packers an A for their draft.
It's probably when they drafted like Justin Harrell. They were like, that's a great pick. A+. You know?
He's going to be a part of that defensive line for 10 years. He'll be great.
Yeah. Year and a half later.
You know, the other news today, or that happened in the last 24 hours or so, is Denzel Ward got paid 5 years, $105 million bucks. I think the reality is there for Packers fans. I mean, you're looking at 5 years, 110, because he's going to want to be paid that much money. And you know, if you're going to spend $30 million a year on a receiver, I don't care. I'm fine spending $20 million a year or whatever to defend that receiver.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think I actually wrote an article for Wiz Sports Heroics saying, like, you know, this makes the Jair deal relatively easy. The market's been set. You know, the agent knows what they want. The Packers know what this is going to cost them. It's just a matter of ironing out the fine details and whether or not, you know, Jair wants to be in Green Bay long-term. You know, that's going to go into consideration, stuff like that. But they have the money for it. Like, they could set a 5. Jair's relatively young. I don't mind setting a 6-year deal that's backloaded that you can get off of after like year 4. Like, that doesn't bother me. I think you have to do it. You know, the Packers kind of lucked into this ridiculously competent elite secondary with Stokes playing so well in his rookie year and honestly picking up Rasul Douglas off the street. Yeah. And I think all of us Packer fans remember 3 years ago with Ladarius Gunter trying to cover Julio Jones in the NFC Championship game.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you can't have that. So whatever Jair costs, you pay him. You absolutely do it.
Yeah, I mean, out of nowhere, 3 years ago, who would have thought that they might have the best secondary in the National Football League? I mean, Adrian Amos has been a slam dunk of a signing. Darnell Savage has been up and down, but the other 3 guys, like you mentioned, I mean, it's been outstanding. And all of us, you know, I was in a conversation with a buddy of mine, and he's one of these guys that's just flies off the handle. GMs don't know what they're doing. I could draft better players than they could draft. And he said Gutekunst has done a terrible job. And I think about where this defense was 3 years ago, what he has done, you know, drafting Rashawn Gary and finding all these other guys. You know, the offense is the offense. It matters what LaFleur does. Gutekunst can't do a ton to make LaFleur's offense better besides add some pieces here and there, but that defense was a joke. They were bottom 10. Now they're easily a top 10, probably a top 5 defense. And who knows what else is going to happen come this draft. I know there's a lot of guys, all the smoke. Gutekunst is doing a phenomenal job, I believe, outside of the Jordan Love pick, which still we don't know if it was a good pick or not.
Yeah, I think and people seem to forget that Gutekunst was the guy who brought in LaFleur too.
Yes.
You know, like let's give the guy some credit. If you want to knock Brian Gutekunst, you could knock his first draft in 2019, where the only player left is Jair Alexander. But that guy's the best cornerback in football. So, you know, like, do you want 11 depth pieces or do you want the best cornerback in football? That's not necessarily a knock.
Yeah, I don't think it is. I mean, who found Devondre Campbell? That there's another guy. I mean, it's just
Elton Jenkins in the second round playing all 5 offensive line positions.
Hey,
you know,
it's just he's just such a good talent evaluator that he's been able to find guys. And I know that was the knock on Ted Thompson was he was always going to find a guard and turn him into a tackle. He was going to find an outside guy and try to move him back on the inside. And it was just like, dude, just draft them where they're at. And draft the piece for what the piece is and put the piece in the defense or the offense or what it is. But Gutekunst, especially on that offensive line, has been able to find guys that can play all 5 spots.
And he doesn't, you know, he's not late to give up on a guy. You know, like he moved on from Jamon Moore relatively quick, moved on from Vince Beagle relatively quick. Like he's moved on from Josh Jackson, the corner out of Iowa, relatively quick. It's like he'll draft somebody And if they don't perform in a year, 2 years, and it doesn't look like they're going to be ready, he's 100% fine bringing in somebody off of a practice squad, bringing in a bargain free agent and saying, dude, we drafted you in the second round, but you haven't been performing. That's on you.
And maybe the biggest deal of all, allegedly, the relationship is fine between he and Rodgers. Like that's the most important thing in terms of short-term, long-term. Aaron Rodgers and Gutekunst are now getting along.
Yeah. And like, he might have, done an awful lot right away in 2020 when Jordan Love was taken to sour that relationship. But you got to give the guy an absolute ton of credit for one, fixing it, and two, fixing it with the media spotlight on him. Like, he has said everything perfect in nearly every interview, every talk that he's had with the media, knowing that every single person is watching this.
Yeah, somebody's going to go on Pat McAfee's show and just start talking about Joe Rogan. Never mind, we'll get in. That's another. I don't need to get into any of that stuff. That's not what this podcast is all about. Here's my gut feeling. Going back to the wide receivers as we get ready to wind this up here, Sam. I don't think they're going to get anybody. I think they're going to maybe draft a receiver in the first round. They're going to stick to their board. They're not going to reach whoever is at the top of their board. And then Packers fans are going to be pissed off in 2 weeks from right now. And I believe that is what is going to wind up happening because they'll say they didn't do anything. But what I don't think Packers fans realize is that June 1st designation. By the time we get to June 1st, a lot of the salaries about compensation and what teams owe, if they trade pieces or don't trade pieces, it's like the draft is not the be-all, end-all for Green Bay, when it comes to acquiring anybody and we get into the summertime. That could still happen.
Yeah, no, it definitely could. And I know there's a couple of guys, my mind's blanking right now, that come June 1st designations that teams could save a lot of money on moving off of. And something like that, honestly, would probably work better for the Packers this year, improving from last year. If they don't have to give up picks for this year, and let's say for Deebo Samuel, right? The Packers, let's say they take a receiver in the second round and they kind of have that guy. And the relationship with the 49ers continues to sour. There's absolutely no deal done. He's come out and said, I don't want to be here. It's better for the Packers to have those 4 rookies in the top 2 rounds and then trade draft picks next season for a guy like Deebo this year, especially when Rodgers is kind of year to year that they say he's going to be.
No, it does make sense because then if let's say it's Watson or it's Menchie from Bama or whatever, or Pickens from Georgia, they get a year. You don't need him to come in and be Justin Jefferson. You don't need him to be Jamar Chase. It'd be cool if they were. It'd be real cool if they were.
It'd be awesome.
But you don't need him to be. And then you would have Deebo and you bank on Sammy being there for half a season and Cobb and Lazard and all the different weapons and all of that kind of stuff. What's your gut feeling that happens between now and the end of the draft?
Gut feeling.
I know Miles Boykin was high on your list. I checked
Miles
out your Twitter.
Boykin. Yeah. So he just signed today. Actually, the Steelers picked him up on waivers.
I haven't checked. The Steelers waiver acquisitions was my next thing to do.
Honestly, I think I tweeted today, like, I'm almost 100% sure the Packers are going to take a receiver in the first or second round, and that's why I don't think it's going to happen.
Yes.
So I almost feel like they're going to take 2 second-round receivers. They're going to kind of double dip there. And in the first round, I think they're going to follow the board, kind of see where things go and kind of go that route is what I think will happen. I know there's a lot of good defenders that are going to be around there at 22 and 28. For me, it's going to depend on kind of how the board falls. And if there is a guy like Olave or Jameson Williams, somebody like that who falls to that 22 spot, I don't love the idea of reaching for a receiver. I just don't. I think there's more value there in the later rounds. I think if you're going to reach for, an interior, an edge player, a quarterback, a left tackle, those kind of premier positions make more sense to me for reaching for. But I think they take a receiver in the second round. That's my gut feeling.
If they wind up with Olave or Watson and Nakobe Dean, build Gutekunst a statue right now. That's it right there. And Packers fans want receivers they're going to wind up with Tyler Linderbaum. That's what's going to happen. They're just they're not going to get it.
So I'm going to tell you, mine is I will build Brian Gutekunst a statue if at 22 he goes Travis Jones, defensive lineman from UConn, and 28 goes Petrie from Baylor, and then in the second round takes 2 receivers, one of them being Alec Pierce.
Yeah,
It's a dream situation for me.
That's your one right there. That's it.
Yeah, that's my one. I think that sets them up defensively. They're going to have to be top 5, and they just paid Rodgers. He's back-to-back MVP. Go out there and make whoever you're playing with score points.
Well, you and I, as Packers fans, have been tremendously disappointed by day one of the draft for many, many years. So what's another year here in 2022? Sam, thanks so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate it. My first time actually talking to you. I know we chatted on Twitter earlier, but this was a lot of fun. If you want more of Sam _ Davel on Twitter, at his podcast, wherever you find your podcast, Beer, Deer, and Cheese, please come on again, man. This was a good time.
Oh, thank you for having me. I had a blast. And I mean, I could talk, I'm sure you're the same way. We could talk Packers football for hours and hours and hours. And at the end of the day, like Brian Gutekunst and this team has showed that they know what they're doing. And so as much as I would love for them to do this, most of the time they're more right than I am. So,
yes.
I'm probably going to be disappointed in 9 days.
Yeah.
And, just as disappointed as I was with the Rashawn Gary pick, and I was wrong on that one, just as disappointed with the AJ Dillon pick, wrong on that one. I'm sure come week 8, I'm going to be like, Goot knows what he's doing. Yeah, Goot knows what he's doing.
Yeah, he knew that Alabama A&T left guard was the right move in 22. Yeah, right? We were just all way off. Sam, come back and see us, man. Appreciate it.
Yes, appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Sam Davel, Beer, Deer, and Cheese is his podcast. This has been Wickett on Wisconsin for WISportsHeroics.com. As always, go Pack, go Bucks, and go Brewers.